West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
People say now, wow, we've never had a president trying to tear down the justice system and attack federal law enforcement officials like Trump is now. Yes, we have. We definitely have, except he was vice president, not president when he did it. His name was Spiro Agnew, and he was facing a 40-count federal criminal felony indictment in 1973.
Because of these tactics which have been employed against me, because small and fearful men have been frightened into furnishing evidence against me, they have perjured themselves in many cases, it's my understanding. I will not resign if indicted. I will not resign if indicted.
Crowd goes wild. Washington Post and New York Times headlines, page A1 in both papers the next day. Agnew declares he will not quit. Agnew declares he will not resign even if indicted. 11 days later, he resigned. Now, this is the crucial point, I think, at least today. I think it is crucial to know that the Justice Department at that time, when they were putting together all of this voluminous hard evidence against Agnew, they believed that in this vice president, Agnew, they were looking at a man who had committed dozens of felonies. And they believed they were looking at a man who had a very good shot at being the next president of the United States. Not only because vice presidents tend to run for the top job themselves after serving as vice president. Sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. But in Agnew's case, there was an even more immediate expectation that he was going to become president. The Justice Department had very good reason to expect in 1973 that Nixon was going down. The Watergate scandal was getting worse and worse and worse. Nixon was pretty unhealthy by then in lots of ways. His behavior was erratic and strange, which is something that top officials of the Justice Department saw personally in their interactions with Nixon, including the Attorney General himself. I mean, it just seemed like very good odds that if Nixon didn't keel over, there was a very good prospect that he was going to be out. He was going to resign or he was going to be forced out of office by impeachment, which would, of course, make his vice president president. And his vice president, the Justice Department believed, had committed dozens of felonies. And they had the evidence to back it up. So just think about that moment in time for a second. I mean, think of that moment in time in relation to where we are today, with Trump about to be arraigned on 37 felony counts tomorrow. I mean, we've got Trump saying right now, I will not suspend my campaign because of this indictment. I will never drop out of this campaign. He said this weekend, I will continue to run for president not only after I'm indicted, I will continue to run for president even if I'm convicted. That's what Trump's saying now. In Agnew's case, you just heard him say it. I will not resign if indicted. Very same kind of pledge. But think about how that would work in practical terms. I mean, think about that with the Agnew case. Especially given that, with the benefit of hindsight, we now know that Nixon was out. Nixon didn't get to the end of this term. He was forced out by the Watergate scandal. Think about what that would have meant with Agnew not resigning if indicted. Right? They've got all the evidence against him. Justice Department indicts him. He says he won't resign if indicted. So, okay, let's say they pressed on and they went to trial. He would very likely be convicted on dozens of felony counts. They had very hard evidence against him. So he'd be convicted. He'd get sentenced to jail, quite possibly. It was dozens of felonies. It's not like Espionage Act felonies, but still, it's bad. If he doesn't resign, he goes on trial, he gets convicted and then sentenced to jail, then he's the vice president of the United States in jail. And from jail, what the Justice Department is expecting about Nixon comes true. Nixon goes poof from the presidency. And so now, post-Nixon, we've got the new president governing from jail, from federal prison. Or maybe now that Agnew's president, he tries to pardon himself from prison, but nobody really knows how that would work. Can you do that? Would people obey the order that he proclaimed himself pardoned? It would be chaos. So what do you do in that circumstance if you're the U.S. Department of Justice? What do you do as the Justice Department when you believe you've got someone who you believe has committed dozens of felonies? Felonies in this case that he was only able to commit because he held public office. It was only because he was a high-ranking public official that he was allowed access to these things that allowed him to commit these crimes. What do? Do you just prosecute this guy like anyone else? I mean, at a base level, yes, nobody's above the law. We only have one system of law for everyone. Nothing about being an elected official gives you a license to commit crimes or a license to get away with it if you do. The last time we had to contend with something very much like this as a country, the three young idealistic prosecutors who had run this case, who had documented all the bribery and extortion claims against Agnew, who had amassed all the evidence for trial, they wanted not only to put him on trial, they wanted to convict him and put him in jail. But what the Justice Department offered the guy was no jail. It is a decision that is controversial to this day, and for good reason, but that's what they did. The Justice Department insisted that the evidence of all his alleged crimes be made public and put in writing. That's what I showed at the very top of the hour. They put that in writing. They introduced it in open court. They released it to the public. It was printed in all the papers. But in addition to, printing all that evidence that they had of his crimes, they didn't do much else. They let him plead to just one count of tax evasion, and they agreed he would serve 0 jail time. In exchange for that, what he had to agree to was to leave elective office, to resign. Here was the front page of the New York Times. Spiro T. Agnew resigned as Vice President of the United States today under an agreement with the Department of Justice to admit evasion of federal income taxes and avoid imprisonment. The stunning development ending a federal grand jury investigation of Mr. Agnew and probably terminating his political career shocked his closest associates and precipitated an immediate search by President Nixon for a successor. It's interesting, they didn't, as part of the plea deal, they didn't require him to swear that he would never run for public office again. That's why the Times said it was, this deal had probably terminated his political career. But they did make him resign from the office he was then holding. They figured that the shame of that would be enough to keep him from ever getting elected to anything again. His supporters were so mad in the wake of that deal. You might have thought for a minute that they would vote for him again if they could.
I thought he was one of the greatest men that this country has ever had.
What is your reaction to the resignation?
I think it's just a sad thing.
I'm just sick about it. I think he's a man of his word, and I think they've all been doing the same thing for ever since I started voting, and I think it's just too bad. I think he's a great man.
I think it was very unnecessary. I'm just sick. I'm very unhappy. I don't think it was necessary. I think it's a lot of political hogwash, and
In the immediate aftermath of Agnew's plea deal, he's not going to prison, but he does have to resign office immediately. In the immediate aftermath of that deal, his supporters were so strongly in support of him. They were so upset at the charges against him. You might have thought the country was on the precipice of something terrible. But you know what? It passed. It took a little while. He stayed in the news for a few weeks, a few months. He was very mad about what had happened to him. But then he just faded out. He disappeared. His name all but disappeared from history. But it hasn't entirely disappeared. We do have his example. We have had experience with something like this before as a country. And whether you like how that worked out with him or not, whether you think that was justice or not, that is the real history of how the U.S. Department of Justice contended with these issues the last time they were confronted with something like this. I mean, here was a man who fully expected himself to be the next president of the United States. The U.S. Justice Department also expected that he might be about to become the next president of the United States. But the Justice Department also had evidence that he had committed dozens of felonies. He went nuts about the fact they were investigating him. He threatened them 9 ways to Sunday. He tried to shut down that investigation. He tried to bully them. He said he was going to come after them and turn the tables on them. But they did not back down. They confronted him with the evidence in court. And what happened? He pled. He pled to avoid jail, and they let him because he also agreed to leave public office. We have only ever done something like this once before as a country, and that's how we did it the last time. Now, does this mean that the Justice Department today is going to approach this second time around, this time with Trump, the same way they did with Agnew? We don't know. But the idea that Trump might plead, that he might negotiate to plead to something in exchange for lenience, that's something that's sort of generally being dismissed out of hand right now, when perhaps it shouldn't be. I mean, particularly if it looks like there's a chance of jail time that attends to these charges for him. Particularly if pleading guilty to something might be his only way to avoid jail time. The question of whether or not Trump's future eligibility for public office might be part of any such plea is something that everybody's afraid to touch with a 10-foot pole, I know. But we really have only ever done this once before. And that's the way we did it. We made his public office, his holding public office, part of the plea deal. That's the solution. The still controversial to this day solution that the Justice Department and the lawyers for the defendant came up with 50 years ago, the last time we were plagued with a problem this disgusting. And it's no use pretending that that isn't the relevant history here. It is. And I think we should not look that gift horse in the mouth. I think history is here to help.
It is Tuesday, the 13th of June of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Hey, the Spanish paprika used to be quite rare, and it's actually not any better and not any worse than the Hungarian paprika. It's just that they produced a lot less. And in spite of the drought that they are experiencing in Spain, their paprika output has actually increased quite a bit, to the point where you could get the Spanish paprika also and not have to pay as much as one had to in the past. But Hungarian paprika is there, and there's lots of it. And therefore, it's a little bit less expensive. So there you go. You can do the Spanish kind as well. So I would recommend it. But go ahead and stay with the Hungarian. You'll never be able to tell the difference anyway. No, you won't. Okay, well, what a day we have ahead of us. Looks like arraignment day. I saw an order that Cannon, she went to work this morning, and the first thing she did was let everyone know she's not recusing. Are you kidding me? Did anybody actually think that she would? This is what she was put there for. Come on. I mean, we all know one of the main jobs of an organized mob fixer is buying off the right judges in the right spots. And this was on the list. And they planned this quite a while ago. I have no idea how it is that her jurisdiction actually, it's not even close to Mar-a-Lago, actually. There's another one that was much closer, but Trump moved that, remember, in the civil case. It was going to be seen or heard by a magistrate about a mile away, but they decided to go, I don't know, hundreds of miles because they were judge shopping. And that's okay. Has anybody divulged what Cannon's relatives, how they donated in political campaigns? Has anybody made any news about that? Because I keep hearing about Jack Smith's wife. You hear about all the relatives of anybody who has been a critic of Donald Trump. Well, they're just Trump haters because they donated to somebody that doesn't like Trump. So effing what? What a bunch of whiners. The only people that can judge Trump are the ones that kiss his ass. Of course, that's what he thinks. That's what I paid them to do, to kiss my ass. They better judge me the way I want them to judge me. Yeah, well, like I said, part of the job, a main part of the job of an organized mob fixer is buying off the right judges. They got one in that cannon. Yep. Inexperienced Federalist Society, that's all you need. And that's what they look for. Young, inexperienced Federalist Society. Lifetime appointment. Oh, wow. Gee. So, in other words, everybody else has civil asset forfeiture when they commit a crime because the benefits of that crime, the fruits of the crime, cannot be used while you're, under indictment. And if you want your stuff back after you've been judged, not guilty, it takes a long time to get that stuff back. You have to apply for it, and then somehow the application papers get lost, etc., etc., etc. I would think the fruits of the crime that Trump has committed include the judges sitting on the courts right now. Top to bottom. I think we should civil asset forfeiture all those judges, put them in an escrow account, and then, if he's guilty, they're out. If he's judge not guilty, let him apply and see if we can reseat him. It'll take some time. Okay. Well, that's not going to happen, but I like thinking about it. Talk about there's two tiers of justice. Damn right. Like I said, anybody else would have had all of the fruits of their crime confiscated by the state in civil asset forfeiture, and there is a cost, a value assigned to the buying off of a judge. Because if he didn't pay the tax on it, there you go. Remember they used to say that back in the day about, like selling pot. If you sold pot, you have to pay the tax on it. But who's going to admit it, huh? Because then once you admit that you were selling pot, which is illegal because you paid a tax, but as long as you paid the tax, they can't charge you for that. Well, did he pay a tax on the value of these judgeships? I want to know. Okay. Well, looks like a circus out there in Miami. It's not, fortunately, the armed insurrection and the hut military type guys. They didn't have enough time to train. You know, part of January 6th that people keep forgetting is like all the dress rehearsals at state houses all over the country the summer before. They trained, and if you think that that's just sort of like coincidence, no, it was coordinated. They trained on the state houses so they could do to the Capitol what they did on January 6th. They did. So they didn't have enough time to do that, so, okay. Fortunately, I guess that's fine. But it is a circus down there. God. And some GOP leaders are concerned about how the protest will look. Well, God, you should have been worried about that when you had caravans of MAGA trucks going up Interstate 5 to invade Portland and cause trouble so that Fox could say the city is under attack. Yeah, the Proud Boys and the Nazis attacked them with the help from the cops because, hey, we thought they were like our friends. Yeah, well, in some ways they are, aren't they? So now we got this spectacle in Miami, and I don't know. We don't get to hear anything. The senior judge said there won't even allow reporters to have their phones in the courtroom. No radio, no audio, no television, no phones. Fortunately, we have pad and pencil. I don't think they can prevent that from happening, but you never know. These are Federalist Society judges. They make it up as they go along. Talk about activist. Activist is just code word for liberal and person of color and or person of color or woman, person of color. All right. I've been saying all right a lot this morning, haven't I? All right. Well, why don't we get ahead of ourselves here and let you know what we have in store for you here in this salon we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, because we have a few longer reads, not too long, but we might as well get right into it. Yes, banning Trump from public office could tempt the DOJ to offer a no-jail plea deal. I actually want to see him in jail. I want to see this party have their leader in jail and then have him issue edicts while behind bars. You know, just like a gangland mafioso running the business while in the stir. In the stir? Maybe. On the rest of the menu, funding for schools, literacy programs, and special education teachers in Oregon could be jeopardized by a Republican walkout that has stalled hundreds of bills and derailed the legislature for the last 6 weeks. Nullify democracy. That's all they know how to do. The California Coastal Commission penalized some buku-rich Malibu homeowners for blocking access to Escondido Beach, and it's been going on for about 40 years. It's about time. And a first-of-its-kind Illinois law will penalize libraries that ban books. It's about time. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where South Africa's ruling party expelled its former Secretary General while he faces charges of criminal corruption. And the United Nations Secretary General called for coordinated global action on disinformation, hate, and artificial intelligence. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page from that chat room link to the left, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And please do help us pay our bills, and you can do that by becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and it doesn't take much. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, how about that? If you could afford to send us those funds once a month, just one espresso-type coffee drink a month, that really does help us pay those bills and all the other costs in running this powerhouse of resistance. And we thank you for your generosity. And we really thank those of you who have upped your patronage. Bought us a couple of cups of coffee. Thanks. Anyway, thank you for your generosity, because we found that when we pay our bills, we kind of fly under the radar. They with a capital T, continue let us doing what we do, and that is resist the Nazi takeover of not just the United States of America, but representative democracies around the world, because they're after us and we won't let it happen. No, we won't. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those and a lot more, too. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam, of course. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos 10 minutes before showtime. But you can always find the show notes and links diaries by going to my social media feeds, because the links are right there, and you can find the actual reportage, and that's how we like it. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found, mixed in with all the rest of us. There's a lot more of us than there are of them. Never let them forget that. All right, Claire Rush from the Associated Press brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Funding for schools, literacy programs, and special ed teachers in Oregon, a state where 60% of third graders cannot read at grade level, could be jeopardized by a Republican lockout. And I misspoke, it's a walkout, but it's like a walkout that has stalled hundreds of bills and derailed the legislature for nearly 6 weeks. The standoff over a bill that would expand access to abortion and gender-affirming health care, because that's the grievance du jour now, could scuttle much-needed education funding in a year when the stars seem to align for Oregon's budget. Tax revenues have exceeded state economists' projections, allowing lawmakers to approve a record K-12 budget of $10.2 billion. But the education spending legislation needs a vote from the Senate, which has not been able to conduct business since May 3rd because of the GOP boycott, and time is running out with just 2 weeks left until the legislative session ends. Supporting strong schools and improving student outcomes should be enough to make anyone show up for work, Democratic State Representative Courtney Naron, the House Committee on Education chair, said at a recent rally against the walkout. From early childhood through higher education, our schools and students need us to respond to serious challenges. Oregon Senate Republican office said in an email that it is critically important that we make sure education is fully funded. Republican Minority Leader Senator Tim Knopp said in an email his caucus will return by June 25th to pass substantially bipartisan bills and budgets. But Democrats say waiting until the session's last day to pass budgets is not feasible, and school districts need a sense of potential funding by early July to begin planning for the next school year. If lawmakers don't return soon, Senator Michael Dembrow, the Senate Committee on Education chair, said he suspects Democratic Governor Tina Kotek will need to convene a special session at some point to do the budgets. Dembrow also said he was optimistic that an agreement to end the walkout could be on the horizon. In a weekly newsletter to constituents sent on Sunday night, he said that top Democratic and Republican leaders had been involved in several days of intense negotiations. It's too soon for me to say much of anything about these negotiations, but I can say, Dembrow said, that they are promising at this point, if they work out, we could be back voting on the Senate floor by midweek. Well, it's Tuesday now. Silas Valentino of the San Francisco Chronicle brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. The public will have better access to a beach in Southern California that's noted for secrecy, following a 40-year effort from state agencies to untangle a labyrinthine legal history created by wealthy homeowners to block beach access. The California Coastal Commission and California State Coastal Conservancy collaborated to open access to Escondido Beach in Malibu, coincidentally Spanish for hidden beach. The beach is located in a highly popular area near the famous Paradise Cove and Point Dume. The commission approved an agreement with the two current homeowners that will ultimately force them to build both a public access way to the beach and a parking lot, estimated to cost several $1 million, plus pay a fine for the violations. The neighboring properties are currently owned by Frank Mancuso, a former film studio executive for Paramount and MGM, and the heirs of Don Wildman, who founded the now-defunct chain Bally Total Fitness. Wildman died in 2018, and the property passed to his family. Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed into law a bill that he says will make Illinois the first state in the nation to outlaw book bans. Illinois public libraries that restrict or ban materials because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval will be ineligible for state funding as of January 1st, 2024, when the new law goes into effect. The new law comes into play as states across the U.S. push to remove certain books in schools and libraries, especially those about LGBTQ plus themes and by people of color. The American Library Association in March announced that attempts to censor books in schools and public libraries reached a 20-year high in 2022, twice as many as 2021, which was then the previous record. Well, this is one way that we punched the Nazis. Now let us go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Welcome to Science Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series. I'm Andrea Thompson, SciAm's editor for Earth and Environment. Today, we're talking fire and smoke. Here's what you need to know about the wildfire smoke blanketing the eastern U.S. right now. And even if you're not living downwind at the moment, we've got a lot of news you can use on smoke, air quality, and how to protect your health. I've pulled together a bunch of local experts, my very smart Scientific American colleagues. #SmokeNerds. By the way, we've got our expert recommendations for sites and apps you should use to check the air quality and whether wildfire smoke is in your forecast. So make sure to listen all the way to the end. Megan Bartels is a news reporter here. Lauren Young is associate health editor. Tanya Lewis is our senior health editor for news. Hey, y'all.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey.
So where should we start? I think the obvious place to start is, where's the smoke coming from? I'll take this one. The smoke is coming from Canada, in particular for the current event, mainly wildfires in Quebec. But Canada has had a terrible wildfire season across the whole country. There have been more than 400 fires so far this year, and they've burned more than 9 million acres. Fires have also been bad out west in Alberta and British Columbia, and smoke from those fires swept down over Montana and Colorado in May, causing really poor air quality. All of these fires are happening because Canada has seen stubborn, hot, dry weather, including record high temperatures in May. So when there's a spark, for example, in the form of lightning from thunderstorms, fires can really take off. So we know where it's coming from, but how long can we expect the smoke to last? How is it moving? Megan, I know you've been reporting on that.
Yeah, so it turns out it's really difficult to predict how long the smoky conditions might last. The wildfires themselves are likely to keep burning for a while. A Canadian fire analyst I spoke to says he hopes conditions there might ease up a little next week to at least reduce the number of fires that are starting. From there, it's a matter of where the wind is blowing and how high the smoke is in the atmosphere. Sometimes smoke stays high up and just creates some haze, but this week, the smoke has been hanging out close to the surface, which makes it a much bigger problem. Geographically, the interaction between a high-pressure system over Canada and a low-pressure system east of it have sent the smoke south. Over the past few days, the smoke has moved, plaguing New York on Wednesday, then heading down into Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland on Thursday. You can check your local branch of the National Weather Service or airnow.gov for forecast information.
Thanks for that, Megan. So those experiencing this event probably want to know what's in the smoke. What should people pay attention to? AQI, PM 2.5? What do these things mean? Lauren, can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So when we think about air quality, we look at the Air Quality Index, which is a color-coded 500-point scale that ranks air quality in your area. And one of the primary measurements for the index is particulate matter 2.5. The shorthand of that is PM 2.5, which are fine particles that are 2.5 microns or smaller across. You can't see these harmful particles, but they can be inhaled deeply into the lungs. With smoke and air pollution, you also have volatile organic compounds. That's what gives the smoke its sort of acrid, distinct smell. These compounds are toxic and are small enough to slip past face masks. But the thing about a lot of wildfires these days is that they are increasingly burning residential communities. That means on top of the plants and the vegetation that burns in forest wildfire, you're also burning things like paint thinners, detergents, plastics, cars, and so on.
Yikes. So what are the health risks from these things, and who are the most vulnerable groups?
This smoke can really impact people with pre-existing conditions. So people with asthma, cardiopulmonary disease, lung disease. What it does is it can worsen your condition and make it more difficult to control symptoms. I talked to Ilana Jaspers at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She told me her patients come in sometimes needing more medication. So they're wheezing, they have shortness of breath, or difficulty breathing. Children, especially those under the age of 5, can have a 2-fold increase in asthma. The smoke can not only make your asthma worse, but it can actually induce it. So it ups your chances of an asthma attack. Adults older than 65 also should be careful with wildfire smoke exposure. Even less than a day's worth of exposure from smoke hundreds of miles away can cause an increase in heart attacks and strokes. Kari Nato at Harvard University told me that some research has found the increased risk of stroke goes up by 40% from wildfire smoke exposure. Dr. Nato also told me that people of color and underserved communities are disproportionately affected by extreme weather events like wildfire. A lot of research has shown these groups are already at high risk of health issues because of where they may live and the discrimination they face. Dr. Nato explained that people of color in the U.S. are more likely to live near toxic waste dumps or industries that may emit pollution. These populations already have had sensitization to other toxicants, so wildfire smoke is another variable on top of that.
So are there health risks even for healthy people? Is there research into what continuous exposure to wildfire smoke over multiple seasons does to our lungs?
Yeah, so there are absolutely risks. No one is immune from wildfire smoke symptoms. Even within 8 hours of being exposed to just a little bit of wildfire smoke hundreds of miles away, you can start feeling the effects. Common ones are itchy throat, coughing, watery eyes, your skin starts itching or becomes dry. Within days to weeks, people can start seeing changes in asthma, heart attack, and stroke. There was a paper published last year that showed that brain cancer and lung cancer increases not only in wildfire fighters, but also in communities that have been exposed for many years to wildfire smoke. People who are pregnant should also be careful because smoke has been linked with premature and stillbirth. A really important thing to note is the mental health aspects of all of this. Seeing and being immersed in these dense clouds of orange-brown smoke, it's unsettling, it's stressful. If you start to feel anxious, reach out to others or to a counselor. Research has also shown that people can develop post-traumatic stress disorder after wildfire events and smoke. Dr. Nato says that we should all be compassionate and give people agency to talk about climate-related anxiety to others.
I think we've all felt a little stressed the last couple of days. Tanya, can you tell us what people who aren't used to dealing with wildfire can do to protect themselves?
Yeah, so first of all, limit your time outside, especially strenuous activities like exercise. If you have to go outside, wear a high-quality mask like an N95 or KN95. You probably still have some lying around from COVID. When you're inside, keep your windows closed. If you have an air purifier, run that on high. There are lots of options out there, ranging from about $50 to well over $300. I have a couple that I like that are $150 to $200. You want something with HEPA or MERV filters. Those are the kind used in hospitals that block really small particles like those found in wildfire smoke. And make sure it's strong enough for the size of room you're in. If commercial purifiers are too pricey, you can also build your own version. During the pandemic, some scientists came up with a design called a Corsi-Rosenthal box to protect against COVID. It's basically a box fan and 4 or 5 HEPA filters duct taped together in a cube, and it also works for air pollution. I built one myself last year, and it's proven pretty useful in the last couple of days here in New York. They can be a bit loud, but it's worth it for the good air quality. If you don't have a purifier or Corsi-Rosenthal box, but you do have an AC, you can run that and it will provide some filtration. Just make sure it's not pulling in outside air. Fortunately, most window units just recycle inside air. You can also plug up poorly sealed windows with wet towels or painter's tape to prevent air from leaking in. If you don't live somewhere where you can seal the windows and filter the air, try to go somewhere that does, like an office or library. Just remember, wear a good mask on your way there and back.
Thanks, Tanya. I have definitely been wearing a mask outside this week. So, finally, something people may be wondering is, do we think this could become a more regular issue in our rapidly changing climate? Another question I'll take. So climate change does prime things for more and stronger wildfires because the hot, dry conditions that help fuel them are becoming more likely and more intense. But factors like forest management also come into play. This can affect how much fuel, branches, leaves, and other detritus there is to burn. And then where smoke from those fires goes will depend on weather conditions at the time. So the point is, the future will be hazy and possibly smoke-filled.
Okay, last thing before we go. You've made it this far. Here's a list of sites that we all like if you want to check your personal air quality. There's airnow.gov, IQ Air, Purple Air, and your local National Weather Service office. You can get there by Googling your town and NWS, and we'll link to all of these in the show transcript.
Thanks again for joining us on this special wildfire episode of Science Quickly. Science Quickly is produced by Jeff Delvicio, Corinne Leung, Talika Bose, and Kelso Harper. Our show music was composed by Dominic Smith. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. For a daily dose of science, sign up for our new Today in Science newsletter. Our colleague, Andrea Garleski, delivers some of the most interesting and awe-inspiring science news, opinion, and whatever else strikes her fancy to your inbox each afternoon. We think you'll enjoy it. Check it out at sciam.com/newsletters. For Science Quickly, I'm Andrea Thompson.
Tanya Lewis,
Lauren Young,
and Megan Bartels.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Danger, danger, go back, go back. Books ahead.
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Escambia County, Florida, has been sued for banning books in its school libraries. Among the books, Tango Makes Three, the award-winning children's book, a true story about a penguin family in the Central Park Zoo with two fathers, a situation apparently not a biggie in the penguin world. So far, the school committee has removed 10 books, including Tango, contrary to the recommendation of the expert review committee, which said keep the books on the shelves. But the school committee didn't, and in fact, changed the policy about what happens to books that have been approved that are being challenged. A challenge book used to stay put during the review process. Now, books being challenged are indefinitely quarantined in a restricted area in the school library that children cannot enter without prior parental permission, an obvious disincentive that raises a kind of penguin and the egg problem. How can kids check out a book or ask for parental permission if they can't hold it in their hands and look at it? As Suzanne Nossel, the CEO of PEN America, one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, said, this school district offers a vivid and disturbing example of what's happening across the country with politically motivated, ideologically driven, viewpoint-based bans on books.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union because freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1904. That was the day that 18,000 workers in Chicago's stockyards went out on strike. Work in the stockyards was often brutal and dangerous. Thousands of workers toiled in the yards, many of them immigrants from Eastern Europe. They worked butchering and processing the hogs and cattle raised in the American West into meat for distribution by rail to consumers across the country. The industry gave Chicago the nickname Hog Butcher for the World. In 1904, the Amalgamated Meat Cutters Union organized a strike. The main demand was increased wages. The meatpacking companies were able to get scabs to cross the picket lines and act as strikebreakers. Most were African Americans and European immigrants. Many of these workers had not been organized by the union, which was dominated by the skilled German and Irish packing house workers. Novelist Upton Sinclair visited the stockyards during the strike to research conditions faced by the workers. In his famous novel, The Jungle, Sinclair gave a fictionalized account that captured the devastating impact of the scabs on the strike. He wrote, quote, "Such were the stockyards during the strike, while the unions watched in sullen despair, and the country clamored like a greedy child for its food, and the packers went grimly on their way. Each day they added new workers, and could be more stern with the old ones, could put them on piecework, and dismiss them if they did not keep pace." It was not until the 1930s, when the stockyard unions took seriously the task of organizing across race, ethnic, and skill lines, that they finally won a contract and gained the rights of union recognition.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, near the Rogue River Valley. Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 71 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the mid-80s, a bit cooler than yesterday. Partly cloudy throughout the day, with winds out of the northwest at a brisk 10 to 15 miles per hour. A few passing clouds overnight with lows in the mid-50s. Winds out of the northwest at a decreased rate of 5 to 10 miles per hour. Then partly to mostly cloudy tomorrow with highs in the upper 70s. Winds out of the north-northwest back up at 10 to 15 miles per hour. Grass pollen is rated very high right here in the town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 17 parts per million, but that daytime UV index is very high at level 9. Barometric pressure is just now falling to 30.04 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 70%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 81 degrees and fair. Paris is 85 and sunny. Rome is 75 degrees and mostly cloudy with a thunderstorm advisory that may impact critical electrical infrastructure. Kyiv is 65 and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 71 and fair. Hong Kong is 84 degrees with heavy thunderstorms. Tokyo is 73 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 42 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees and cloudy with a small craft advisory on the bay for heavy, dense fog. And New York, New York is 72 degrees Fahrenheit and mostly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Mogamotse Magome of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. South Africa's ruling African National Congress Party expelled its former Secretary General yesterday, Monday, for misconduct and other breaches of party rules, while he also faces charges of corruption in a criminal case. The once influential Ache Magashule is on trial over the misappropriation of money from a government contract worth more than $13 million when he was the premier of the Free State province before his rise to the top administrative position in the ANC. Magashule was suspended as Secretary General in 2021 after he was charged with multiple counts of corruption, money laundering, and fraud. He was suspended in line with the ANC step-aside policy, which requires those in leadership positions to step down from their roles while facing criminal charges. Magashule refused to do so and even issued a letter stating he was suspending South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, the leader of the ANC, from his duties. His defiance and refusal to apologize for the letter led him to be charged with misconduct by the ANC's disciplinary committee. Magashule was found guilty of 4 breaches of party rules by the National Disciplinary Committee and given 7 days to respond to the findings, and then he did not respond, the party said. Magashule is seen as close to Ramaphosa's political rival, former President Jacob Zuma, but his suspension led him to be sidelined from the ANC's conference in December when Ramaphosa was elected as party leader.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Edith M. Lederer of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The proliferation of hate and lies on digital platforms and the threat that artificial intelligence can become an uncontrolled monster demand coordinated global action, starting with a code of conduct for governments, tech companies, and advertisers that promotes truth and protects human rights, the UN chief said yesterday, Monday. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said he plans to appoint a scientific advisory board in a few days and an advisory board on artificial intelligence in September to prepare initiatives that the UN can take. He said he would react favorably to a new UN agency on artificial intelligence and suggested as a model the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is knowledge-based and has some regulatory powers. Guterres told a news conference he plans to consult widely on the just-released principles for the UN Code of Conduct for Information Integrity on digital platforms, which he will issue before next year's UN Summit of the Future. He expressed hope that the code would be widely supported, but when asked whether governments and tech companies are willing to take steps to make digital space safer, he replied, "That's the question I ask myself, don't we all?" Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow. That's right, tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum.